Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. The outskirts of the frontier settlement stretched across dry ground, scattered with low juniper trees that held more dust than color. A small, half-collapsed cabin stood between them, its roof patched with uneven boards, its door reinforced with ropes to keep it from swinging open in the wind. This was where Asha, an 18-year-old Apache woman, had been living since the raid that took her family months earlier. Asha stepped out into the late morning heat with a wooden bowl in her hands. She moved slowly, her body stiff from another night of broken sleep. She checked the area around her cabin first, a habit she had learned out of necessity. Her eyes swept the trees, the narrow trail, and the dry creek. Nothing moved except dust drifting in the light breeze. Still, she did not relax. She rarely did. Her mission was simple: survive quietly. Stay away from the settlement unless she needed supplies. Avoid being seen. Avoid trouble. The townsfolk feared her, and some hated her for reasons that had nothing to do with her actions. That tension shaped every decision she made. Inside the cabin, she put water to heat over a small iron pot, using only a handful of firewood to avoid drawing smoke. While she waited, she repaired a tear in her worn shirt with steady fingers. The repetition kept her mind from drifting into memories she could not handle for long. The night she ran, the shouts, the gunfire, the bodies she could not help. She had not spoken those memories aloud to anyone. Speaking them would make them louder. Her thoughts remained cautious, practical. Keep your distance. Keep your head down. One day at a time. When the water began to boil, she set it aside and prepared for the long walk to the creek. She wrapped a leather strap around the water jug to keep it from slipping, tied her hair back, and stepped onto the narrow path leading downhill. The trail was quiet, and she kept her eyes forward, scanning the ground for tracks. She had grown used to traveling alone, but the fear of being followed never fully disappeared. It sat in her chest, steady and unwelcome. The walk took almost half an hour. At the creek, she filled the jug and rested her knees against the cool stones. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe more freely. The sound of water helped ease the pressure in her mind, but only slightly. She stayed alert, listening for footsteps, voices, or a horse's gait. Her life had become a continuous effort to stay unnoticed, and she had accepted that. She did not expect kindness. She did not expect safety. Her only goal was to make it through the next day. As she rose to head back, she heard something faint, a short grunt, a thud of hooves, and then an abrupt silence. She froze and held her breath. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, but curiosity, mixed with caution, pulled her a few steps forward through the brush. She moved carefully, each foot placed with intention. That was when she saw him for the first time. A middle-aged cowboy sat in the dust beside a large bay horse. His hat had fallen behind him, his shoulder appeared bruised, and he was breathing through clenched teeth. The horse stood nearby, with a front hoof lifted awkwardly, the iron shoe twisted and hanging. The man did not see her at first. He focused on his injury, one hand braced in the dirt, the other pressed to his shoulder. Asha stayed hidden, observing. He carried no weapon in his hands. His expression was tight with pain, but not anger. His body language showed no threat, only exhaustion. This was Elias Ward. Elias had lived near the settlement for years, long before Asha arrived. People described him as quiet, hard-working, and distant. Rumors said he had once had a family, but he rarely spoke of it. Now he worked as a ranch hand and lived alone in a small cabin on the opposite side of town. He had no known conflicts with the Apache, nor with anyone else, but he also avoided forming close connections. Some said grief had pushed him inward. Others said he preferred silence to disappointment. Asha knew only pieces of this from overhearing conversations in town. She had never expected to cross paths with him. She considered turning back. Helping him meant breaking her routine of staying unseen. It meant risking misunderstanding. She hesitated, weighing her options with the same fear-driven logic that guided her daily life. But Elias raised his head then. Their eyes met. He did not stand. He did not reach for his gun. He only lowered his gaze in a slow, weary way, as if he did not want to frighten her. His breathing steadied, but his pain was obvious. Asha felt her pulse climb. Her instincts warned her to run, yet something in his stillness pulled her forward. He looked like a man who had endured too much already. She recognized that look. It matched her own. After several long seconds, she stepped out from the trees. Elias blinked in surprise, but did nothing else. His restraint calmed her more than she expected. Asha approached slowly, stopping several steps away. She studied the twisted horseshoe, the bruise forming under his shirt, the way he held his arm against his ribs. His injury was not life-threatening, but he could not walk far like that. Her thoughts moved quickly and quietly. Help him, then leave. Keep it simple. She set down her water jug and knelt near the horse, her hands steady despite the tension in her chest. The horse shifted, but did not resist her touch. Elias watched her with a careful, respectful expression. No words passed between them. Asha did not yet know why he was there or what path his life had taken before this day. She only knew he needed help, and she could provide it. She lifted the horse's hoof, checked the damaged shoe, and guided the animal into a calmer stance. Elias exhaled with relief. Asha realized, with a small jolt of unease, that this moment, this single decision, might change the quiet isolation she had been living in. But she kept her focus on the task. Her mission, for the moment, shifted. Keep the man safe. Keep the horse steady. End the day without conflict. This choice became the first step in a connection she did not yet understand. Asha kept her hand steady as she inspected the horse's damaged hoof, aware of the quiet tension sitting between her and the injured man behind her. The animal shifted its weight again, and she guided it back into balance. The iron shoe had twisted sharply during the stumble. Removing it would keep the horse from injuring itself further. She loosened the bent nails one by one, working with the same calm focus she used for her own tools and traps. Once the metal came free, she set it aside in the dust. Elias let out a slow breath. The sound carried fatigue more than pain. When she finally looked at him again, he attempted to straighten his posture, but his injured shoulder forced him to stop halfway. His face tightened, and the effort left his breathing uneven. He didn't try to hide it. That honesty made Asha reassess him with more depth. Many men concealed pain out of pride. He didn't. That alone told her something about him. She stepped closer, examining the bruise spreading across his shoulder. His shirt was torn near the seam, the fabric strained from the fall. She judged the injury quickly. Deep bruise, possible sprain, no break. He needed a sling, not a doctor. She pulled a strip of cloth from her pack, one she kept for emergencies, and held it out to him. Elias lifted his eyes to her, uncertain whether he should accept. He hesitated only because he didn't want to startle her. He took the cloth with his good hand. She gestured to his arm. He understood. Asha helped him tie the sling. She kept her movements controlled, careful not to cause more pain. Elias stood quietly, watching the ground instead of watching her face, giving her space to decide how close she allowed him to be. When the knot was secured, she stepped back. Now that the immediate injury was handled, she noticed questions forming in her thoughts. Practical ones she needed answered to assess the situation fully. Where was he heading? How long had he been walking before the fall? Was he alone? He gave her the first answer without her speaking. My horse spooked at a rattler, he said, his voice low and even. Didn't see it until too late. His tone carried no frustration or pride, only explanation. Asha studied him, trying to read whether he expected more help or intended to leave immediately. His gaze followed hers to the loose reins in the dust. I can walk, he added, though his expression made it clear the walk would be slow. Asha didn't believe the trail would be safe for him in that condition. He would manage, but not easily. The nearest settlement was far, and the heat would drain him quickly. She pointed toward the creek, indicating he should rest there before attempting anything else. He understood and nodded once. They walked together in silence. She carried her water jug and kept a steady pace beside the horse, waiting for Elias to move at whatever speed his shoulder allowed. He stumbled once, and she braced the horse's reins to keep it from shifting into him. He murmured a quiet thanks. At the creek, Elias knelt carefully, filling his hands with water and splashing his face. The cold seemed to steady him. Asha stood a few steps away, observing him with the same sharp attention she used when deciding whether an animal was safe to approach. He didn't rush. He didn't complain. He simply recovered, working through the pain with practiced discipline. Asha finally spoke, her voice quiet. "You live near the settlement?" Elias looked up, surprised she had chosen to speak. "Yes, small place on the west side. Work for the ranch that sits behind the ridge." That answered another of her silent questions: why he was alone on this path. Ranch riders used it to check water sources and fencing lines. It wasn't unusual for them to travel this way. She stepped forward, picked up the twisted shoe, and handed it to him. "You need to reset it." He nodded. "I can do it later. For now, I just need to get him home." Asha weighed his words. The trail back to town was long, but he could make it if he stayed slow. His horse was calm and responsive, which improved his chances. Still, she watched Elias with growing awareness. His injury came from a simple accident, but he carried an older heaviness in his eyes, a man shaped by loss and long years of endurance. Understanding that shifted her perception of him. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't looking for trouble. He stood carefully, steadying himself with his good hand on the saddle horn. When he was upright, he turned toward her with a calm, direct expression that held no expectation. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to stop." Asha felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to gratitude. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her without suspicion in their voice. She nodded once, unable to form a response that felt natural. Elias adjusted the reins, preparing to lead the horse rather than ride it. He took a few steps, then paused. He looked back at her, studying her with a seriousness that didn't feel intrusive. "You live out here alone?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer in words. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. Elias accepted it without pressing further. He only gave another short nod, then began the slow walk back toward town. Asha stood by the creek until he disappeared beyond the bend. The tension in her chest eased gradually, replaced by something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with a small, unexpected sense of relief. She hadn't planned to help him. She hadn't planned to speak to him, yet she felt no regret. She picked up her water jug and headed back toward her cabin, her steps lighter than before. Without meaning to, she had crossed a boundary she had built for herself. She didn't know how this choice would affect the days ahead, but she understood one thing clearly. The quiet life she had been trying to protect might not stay unchanged. Not after today. Asha reached her cabin before noon, the sun already heating the cracked ground around the juniper trees. She set her water jug down inside, but instead of returning to her usual routine, she stood in the doorway for several minutes, thinking about the man she had helped. Her mind replayed the way he spoke, the way he moved, and the look in his eyes when he thanked her. Nothing about the encounter had felt threatening, yet it had unsettled her in a different way. She had spent months avoiding every stranger. Now she had stepped toward one. She tried to return her tasks, mending the roof, sorting her remaining dried meat, checking her snare traps, but her focus drifted back to the same questions. Was he safe on the walk home? Would his injury worsen? Did helping him create a risk for her? She had no answers, and the uncertainty sat with her through the afternoon. As the sun dropped lower, she gathered wood for the night fire. While carrying the bundle back toward her cabin, a faint sound caught her attention, a rhythmic crunch of boots on dirt. Her body tensed immediately. She set the firewood down and stepped behind a tree, listening. The footsteps were slow and steady, not rushed. There was no drunken sway in the gait, and no heavy breathing that usually came with trouble. Elias appeared between the trees. He wasn't as close as she expected. He kept a fair distance from her cabin, stopping beside the flat stone near the path. His injured arm remained in the sling she had made. His expression was calm, neither guarded nor expectant. Over his shoulder hung a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Asha stayed behind the tree, watching carefully. He didn't look around or search for her. He simply placed the bundle on the stone, adjusted it neatly so it wouldn't fall, and stepped back. The gesture was quiet, deliberate, and respectful. He started to leave without waiting. Asha stepped out just enough for him to see her. Elias paused, but he did not approach. The distance he maintained matched the caution she needed. She walked slowly to the stone and crouched beside the bundle. Inside, she found dried meat, a small square of cloth, and a few coffee beans wrapped in a pouch. Nothing extravagant, nothing careless. Supplies that reflected thought rather than obligation. Elias cleared his throat lightly. I wanted to repay what you did. His voice stayed low, steady, carrying a type of sincerity she had rarely heard directed toward her. He didn't force conversation. He didn't ask questions. He simply waited for her to acknowledge the gesture. Asha lifted her gaze to him. She studied his stance, how he kept both hands still, how he angled his body slightly away so she wouldn't feel cornered. He regarded her with quiet patience, as if he understood she needed time to decide whether his presence was acceptable. She gave a small nod. It was enough. Elias dipped his head in return, then turned to leave. His movements were slower than that morning, the injury affecting his balance. Asha noticed the strain in his posture. The walk must have been long and painful. That explained why he arrived near sundown rather than earlier in the day. He had made the trip despite the discomfort, which revealed something she didn't expect. He kept his word, even when no one asked him to. As he walked away, she picked up the bundle and carried it into her cabin. The supplies were carefully chosen. He had noticed what she needed without stepping inside her home or intruding. She set the bundle on her table, touching each item with a cautious hand. For months, every offering she received from townsfolk had been thrown at her feet or left with an insult. This was different. This held no hostility. Later, she lit her small evening fire and cooked a simple meal, but her thoughts kept returning to the same questions that had troubled her earlier. Why had he shown her respect when others avoided her? What did he expect from her in return? Was he a man who helped because it was right, or because he hoped to gain something later? The questions pressed at her, but none of them matched the feeling she had sensed around him. He had not asked for anything. He had not tried to get closer. He had not even waited to see whether she accepted the gift. His actions left no sign of hidden motives. When night settled in and the fire softened to embers, she sat outside her cabin and traced the day's events in her mind. She had helped him. He had returned the gesture, and neither moment had carried deceit or danger. That left her with a realization she couldn't ignore. For the first time since losing her family, she had encountered someone who treated her with quiet fairness. Someone who approached her without fear, without judgment, and without force. Someone who acted with restraint instead of dominance. Asha wrapped her blanket around her shoulders and watched the moon rise above the junipers. The settlement still held danger, and the world had not become kinder overnight. But the path she walked no longer felt as narrow as before. A single honest exchange had shifted something inside her. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath. Tomorrow would be another cautious day, but not an empty one. And somewhere near the west side of town, a man carried a bruise on his shoulder and a calm sincerity she could not easily forget. Her life had not changed, but her sense of possibility had. Asha woke before sunrise, her sleep broken by the usual restlessness. She stepped outside into the cool morning air and scanned the area around her cabin. The trail was empty, undisturbed. Nothing suggested that anyone had followed Elias or noticed his visit. The quiet reassured her, though she remained alert. Safety in the frontier was never permanent. She prepared a small breakfast and sharpened the knife she used for skinning game. Her routine steadied her thoughts, but another thought continued to press at the edge of her mind: Elias's injury. She knew bruises deepened during the night. A man who worked long days with livestock needed both arms. His condition would affect him more today than yesterday. The possibility of him pushing through pain concerned her more than she expected. By midday, she traveled toward a ridge overlooking the settlement. She kept a careful distance, hidden among the pines. From there she could observe movement without being seen. The ranch Elias mentioned lay beyond the far edge of town, a cluster of barns and fenced fields. Smoke rose from one chimney. Horses trotted along a training ring. Nobody moved in a hurried or distressed way. It conflicted with the worry she carried, yet she stayed and watched longer, needing to confirm that he was safe. Eventually, she spotted him near the barn, leading a young mare. His movements were slower, measured. The sling still supported his shoulder, but he remained steady. The sight eased the tension inside her. She watched until he disappeared into the barn, then stepped back from the ridge and returned to the trees. She didn't need more. Knowing he was well enough to work was enough. Late afternoon brought a knock against her thoughts she couldn't ignore, a question that had lingered since he left the bundle on the stone. Would he come again? And if he did, why? She had no reason to expect it. Their exchange yesterday had been balanced. She helped him. He returned the gesture. That should have been the end of it. But when dusk settled and the trees grew dark around her cabin, she heard soft footsteps approaching. She didn't retreat this time. She stepped out of her doorway and waited. Elias appeared with the same steady pace as before, carrying a small bundle of cut firewood balanced against his uninjured hip. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from working through pain rather than resting. Still, he stood with composed posture, showing no frustration. He stopped several feet from her door and lowered the firewood onto the ground. "Thought you could use this," he said. Asha examined the wood, clean cuts, even lengths. It wasn't scrap pieces he found lying around. He had chopped them himself. The effort surprised her. It also raised a question she hadn't addressed yet. What did he gain from helping her again? Elias seemed to sense her hesitation. He shifted his weight, careful with his injured side. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quietly. "Just thought it might help." His voice carried an honesty she recognized from the creek. There was no pressure, no expectation, no hint that he wanted something in return. She studied him for several seconds, reading the details she had missed before. He wasn't a man trying to push into her life. He was a man trying to repair a balance in his own. The way he looked at her wasn't searching. It was steady, respectful, and patient. Asha moved toward the woodpile and lifted one of the cut logs. The weight felt right. The grain was clean. Her suspicion faded a little. She looked back to him and gave a small nod of thanks. Elias exhaled in a way that suggested relief. His shoulders eased, though the injured one remained stiff. Asha surprised herself then. She stepped aside, gesturing subtly toward the small fire outside her cabin. It wasn't an invitation spoken out loud, but she offered enough space for him to sit if he wished. Elias hesitated, not wanting to misread her, but after another quiet moment, he lowered himself onto a nearby rock. Asha added a few of the new logs to the fire and sat across from him. The flames cast an orange light across his features, making the strain in his jaw stand out. He tried not to show how much his shoulder hurt, but she saw the effort behind each movement. She spoke first. "You should rest that arm." He offered a faint smile. "I've worked through worse." She wasn't sure if that was meant as reassurance or simple truth. Either way, she didn't push further. Instead, she handed him a small tin cup filled with warm water. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture he understood. His fingers curled around the cup with quiet gratitude. For a while, they sat without speaking. The fire cracked softly. The breeze moved through the junipers behind them. His presence didn't feel invasive. It felt measured, as if he had taken time to understand what distance she needed and adjusted to it. As they sat together, Asha realized there were still things unspoken that shaped their behavior, questions that hung between them but didn't need to be verbalized. She wondered if he treated her with restraint because of her heritage or because he had learned, through loss, how to move gently around wounded people. She also wondered what kind of man carried his pain with so much quiet discipline. Elias finally spoke. "If you ever need anything, or if someone causes trouble, you can come by the ranch." Asha didn't react immediately. She studied him again, searching for hidden motives. She found none. His offer wasn't a claim or a demand. It was a straightforward statement, delivered with the same calm sincerity as everything else he had said. She nodded once, accepting it. The night settled deeper around them. When Elias finally rose to leave, he didn't linger or attempt to step closer. He only lifted his hand slightly in farewell before walking back toward the settlement, his pace slow but steady. Asha watched him disappear through the trees. She understood something clearly now. He didn't return because he expected gratitude or companionship. He returned because he chose to, because helping her felt right to him, and because her presence didn't unsettle him the way hers often unsettled others. When she finally stepped inside her cabin, she felt a shift inside her, a calmness she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since she arrived in this place, she ended the day with a sense that someone in the world moved toward her without fear or resentment. A connection had formed, not through words, but through restraint, consistency, and the quiet act of staying. The next morning arrived with a cold wind rolling down from the ridge, stirring dust around Asha's cabin. She stepped outside before the sun cleared the horizon, gathering the firewood Elias had brought and stacking it against the wall. Her routine felt different now, less solitary, less heavy. The knowledge that someone had chosen to sit beside her last night lingered in her thoughts. She tried not to assign meaning to it too quickly, but the feeling stayed. She prepared for a longer day of searching for food. Her supplies were running low after weeks of careful rationing. Before leaving, she checked her cabin door, tightened the rope holding the frame, and scanned the surrounding trees to ensure no one had passed through in the night. Everything appeared unchanged. As she walked toward the hunting grounds, she carried a quiet question inside her. Why had Elias helped her again? She didn't believe he wanted repayment. He hadn't acted like someone seeking favor. His behavior raised another possibility, one she wasn't comfortable examining yet. It suggested he cared whether she was safe. Hours passed as she followed tracks across dry soil, gathering what she could. By midday, she returned with a modest catch, enough to last several days. She hung the meat to dry, washed her hands in the basin, and sat outside to sew a tear in her skirt. The repetitive motion calmed her, but her thoughts drifted to the same place. The image of Elias sitting by her fire, his expression tired but steady, replayed in her mind more often than she liked to admit. Late afternoon brought a change she didn't expect. A lone rider approached from the west trail. Asha tensed immediately and stood, ready to step behind the cabin if the stranger showed signs of aggression. But the rider dismounted several yards away, keeping both hands visible. Elias. His shoulder was still in the sling, but he moved more comfortably today. His horse remained calm beside him. He approached slowly, stopping near the same distance he had kept during previous visits. "I'm going to check the fence line near the ridge," he said. "Didn't want to pass without letting you know." The statement surprised her. He had no reason to announce his movements, yet he did so with quiet consideration, so she wouldn't be startled by hearing someone nearby. He was thinking ahead, setting boundaries that protected her sense of safety. Asha gave a small nod. She appreciated it more than she could say. Elias shifted his stance and looked around the area with a faint crease in his brow. "Your cabin won't hold through a bad storm," he said. "Roof's too weak. Walls lean in." Asha stiffened. She didn't like others judging her home, even when the assessment was true. But Elias's tone held no criticism, only concern. He glanced at her, as if checking whether he had spoken out of turn. "I can help you reinforce it," he added, "if you're willing." She hesitated. Accepting help meant allowing someone near her living space, something she had avoided since the raid that destroyed her old life. Letting someone close was a risk, but declining meant the cabin would remain vulnerable. The hesitance in her chest came from memories of people who took advantage, not from Elias himself. He noticed her pause and stepped back slightly, giving her room to think. "Only if you want it," he said. "I won't touch anything you don't ask me to." The reassurance eased her tension. She gave a slow, careful nod. Elias's posture relaxed, a sign he hadn't expected agreement but was grateful for it. He told her he would return the next day with tools. Before leaving, he glanced at the bundles of drying meat hanging outside her cabin. "You hunt well," he said, not as flattery, but as recognition of her skill. The simple acknowledgement caught her off guard. People rarely spoke to her without suspicion. Even fewer respected her abilities. She studied him, trying to determine why he treated her this way. Nothing in his expression suggested pity or hidden motive. He spoke as though she deserved fairness. He mounted his horse and rode toward the ridge, leaving her standing in the fading light. That evening, Asha sat by her fire again, thinking through the day. She understood now that Elias's visits were not accidents or obligations. He made deliberate choices to respect her boundaries, to help without pushing, to speak with clarity instead of assumptions. His consistency brought up questions she had tried to avoid. What had shaped him into a man who moved so carefully around others? Why did he carry a quiet weight in his eyes? Why did he choose to spend his time helping someone the rest of the settlement ignored? Those answers were not yet clear, but one thing became certain. Elias did not see her as a threat or an inconvenience. He saw her as a person worth treating with sincerity. As night settled in, Asha felt a shift inside her, a slow, cautious opening she had not expected. For the first time in months, she wasn't dreading tomorrow. She was waiting for it. Asha woke early and prepared the area around her cabin before Elias arrived. She cleared fallen branches, moved tools to one side, and loosened the knots holding the loose roof boards. The decision to let him help still weighed on her, but she pushed the uncertainty aside. The cabin needed reinforcement before the next heavy rain, and she trusted his restraint more than she trusted the weather. By midday, she heard the steady trot of a horse approaching. Elias came into view carrying a saddlebag full of tools. His injured arm was still in the sling, but he managed the reins with his free hand. When he dismounted, he set the tools down carefully and looked around, assessing the structure without stepping too close. "I'll start with the roof supports," he said. "It won't take long, but you'll need to tell me what parts you want kept as they are." The fact that he asked, rather than assuming control, eased the tension in her shoulders. She pointed out the beams she had repaired herself, making clear which sections were off limits. Elias nodded in acknowledgement, listening without interruption. His focus was practical, not critical. He worked slowly, using his good arm to lift and position the boards while asking for her help only when absolutely necessary. Asha handed him nails, steadied the ladder, and held the beams in place as he secured them. Working beside him felt strangely natural. Their movements synced in a quiet rhythm, each understanding the other's pace without needing spoken instructions. Still, there were questions inside her she had avoided, questions about him that had lingered since the moment they first met. One of them rose to the front of her mind when she noticed him wince slightly as he adjusted a beam. "Why do you work alone?" she asked. The question was direct, and she regretted it the moment it left her mouth. But Elias didn't react with discomfort. He paused in his work, rested his good hand on the beam, and answered with quiet honesty. "Most people have families or plans that don't fit with mine," he said. "I've made mistakes, lost people. It's easier to keep to myself." Asha listened without pressing further. His words explained the tiredness she had sensed in him. He carried grief in a way she recognized. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the steady restraint of someone who had lived through loss and learned to keep going. They continued working until the sun lowered behind the ridge. By then, the cabin roof stood straight, the walls had been reinforced, and the structure looked stable for the first time since Asha arrived here. Elias stepped back to inspect the work. Satisfaction showed in the faint lift of his expression. "It'll hold through storms now," he said. "You won't have leaks or collapsing boards." Asha nodded, grateful for more than just the repairs. She felt a sense of relief that surprised her. Allowing him into her space hadn't brought danger. It had brought stability. As they put away the tools, heavy footsteps sounded from the trail leading toward the creek. A man emerged, one of the townsmen Asha had seen lingering around the general store on previous visits. He carried the smell of cheap whiskey and a smirk that immediately put her on guard. "Well, look at this," he said, eyeing Asha as if she were an object left out for inspection. "Didn't think anyone lived out here? Thought the place was abandoned." Asha's grip on the tool bag tightened. Her breath quickened. She didn't recognize the man personally, but she recognized the tone, careless, mocking, dangerous. Elias stepped in front of her without hesitation, positioning himself at a slight angle that protected her without blocking her path. His expression stayed calm, but the shift in his posture was unmistakable. He stood taller, steadier, with the controlled presence of a man who had faced confrontation before and didn't need to raise his voice to end it. "You need something?" Elias asked. The man shrugged. "Just curious who's keeping her company." Didn't expect a ranch hand to be spending time with an Apache girl. Asha felt heat rise in her chest, anger mixed with fear. She didn't know what the man wanted, only that he had come here with a purpose she didn't trust. Elias's voice remained even. "She's not your concern, and you're on private land." The townsman's smirk faded slightly. He shifted his weight, glancing between them. Elias didn't look threatening, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that warned the man not to push further. After a tense moment, the man muttered, "Didn't mean trouble," and turned back toward the trail. Asha let out a slow breath only when the footsteps faded. Her hands were still trembling. Elias didn't comment on it. He simply stood beside her, giving her time to settle. When she finally looked up at him, he met her gaze with a calm, steady expression. "No one will bother you here," he said. "Not while I'm around." The words weren't a promise spoken in confidence. They were a grounded statement from a man who had already shown he meant what he said. Asha felt a quiet shift inside her again, deeper this time. The world was still harsh, but she no longer faced it completely alone. The understanding between them had grown into something stronger, shaped not by grand gestures, but by consistency, protection, and honesty. As the evening settled around them, Elias gathered his tools and prepared to leave. Asha watched him mount his horse, and for the first time, she found herself wishing he would stay longer. She didn't say it, but the feeling stayed with her long after he disappeared into the trees. She stepped inside her newly reinforced cabin and felt something she hadn't felt in months: security. And something more subtle beneath it: trust. Asha spent the rest of the evening sorting her supplies inside the newly reinforced cabin. The sturdiness of the walls changed the room's atmosphere. Less vulnerable, less temporary. She moved with more ease, no longer expecting the roof to shift with every gust of wind. When darkness settled outside, she lit a small lantern and sat near the fire, replaying the confrontation from earlier. The tension in her chest had faded, replaced by the steadying memory of Elias's calm presence. She ate a modest meal, but she wasn't hungry enough to finish it. Her thoughts kept returning to a question that rose after the townsman left. How often had Elias defended others in silence? And what had shaped him into someone who intervened without hesitation, but also without aggression? The next morning, she began her chores early. She carried water from the creek, checked her traps, and cleared debris near the cabin. Each task usually occupied her thoughts fully, but today she moved through them with a distracted mind. She caught herself looking toward the trail more than once, expecting to see Elias's familiar silhouette. She told herself he had his own responsibilities and would not come unless he had reason. Still, the expectation lingered. By late afternoon, the sound of a horse approaching reached her from the distance. She set down the basket she was carrying and walked toward the path. Elias appeared between the trees, riding slowly. His shoulder remained in the sling, but he looked steadier than before. When he dismounted, he held a folded piece of cloth in his good hand. "Thought you could make use of this," he said, offering the cloth to her. When she unfolded it, she recognized it as a durable repair patch cut from old saddle leather. Strong material, hard to come by, useful for fixing bags, coats, or shelter seams. A quiet, thoughtful gift. She nodded in appreciation. His gaze drifted briefly over her repaired cabin, as if confirming that it still stood strong. Once satisfied, he met her eyes again. "You doing all right after yesterday?" he asked, straightforward but without prying. Asha didn't answer immediately. She considered her feelings carefully. Fear still lingered, but not in the same overwhelming way. What had stayed with her was the memory of Elias stepping between her and danger without raising his voice or drawing his weapon. The steadiness of that moment echoed far louder than the threat itself. "I'm fine," she said. Elias studied her expression for a moment, then accepted her answer. He did not try to dig deeper. He knew she would speak if she chose to. She motioned for him to follow her to the fire she had prepared outside. He sat across from her, and the atmosphere settled into a familiar quiet. The silence was not tense. It was comfortable, shaped by the growing understanding between them. Asha pulled out Elias's coat, the one he had worn during their first meeting. The seam along the shoulder was still torn. She held it up for him to see, asking for permission with a glance. Elias nodded, surprised but grateful. "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," she replied. She threaded a needle with thin sinew and began repairing the coat with steady, practiced hands. Elias watched her for a moment before allowing his posture to relax. His expression softened in a way she had not seen before, relief mixed with quiet appreciation. As she stitched, the fire crackled steadily between them. Elias leaned back slightly, his good hand resting on his thigh. After several minutes, he spoke with a gentleness that carried the weight of truth rather than sorrow. "I had a son once," he said. "Lost him years ago. He was just a boy." Asha's hands paused for a moment, her breath tightening. The grief in his voice wasn't dramatic or loud. It was a steady ache he had learned to carry. She resumed stitching, giving him a space to continue if he wished. Elias didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the fire. "After that, I stopped letting people close. Figured it would be easier that way. People leave, or they're taken, and there's nothing you can do." Asha listened, feeling a connection she hadn't expected. His words reflected thoughts she had held for months, the belief that caring for someone only led to loss. Yet here they were, sitting together despite everything they had both endured. She finished the stitches and handed him the coat. He ran his thumb along the seam, impressed by the careful work. "Thank you," he said quietly. Asha nodded and set her needle aside. The air around them felt heavier but not burdensome. It felt truthful. As the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the clearing, Elias rose from his seat. He hesitated, as if debating whether to speak again, then looked at her with a steady, grounded expression. "You don't have to face trouble alone out here," he said. "You've done well on your own, but if you need someone, I'm here." The sincerity in his voice struck deeper than she expected. It wasn't a promise made out of duty. It wasn't pity. It was an acknowledgement of her strength, and an offer of support built on mutual respect. Asha didn't look away. She held his gaze, letting him see that she understood. And for the first time, she felt a shift inside that she couldn't ignore. She trusted him, not blindly, not completely, but enough to allow him into the quiet world she had fought to protect. Elias mounted his horse and gave a brief nod before riding down the trail, leaving her standing beside the fire. The flames flickered against her face as she watched him disappear between the trees. When she returned inside her cabin, the repaired coat still warm from her hands, she realized another truth, one she had been avoiding. Her life was no longer shaped only by survival. Something steadier had entered it, bringing warmth she had not thought possible. And she was no longer afraid of it. The night passed quietly, but Asha woke to the distant rumble of thunder. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with the warning of a coming storm. She stepped outside and looked toward the horizon. Dark clouds were gathering, stretching across the sky like a slow-moving wall. Storms on the frontier were unpredictable, sometimes gentle, sometimes destructive enough to tear apart an entire homestead. Her newly reinforced cabin would hold, but the sound of thunder made her chest tighten. Storms had taken things from her before. She pushed the thought aside and began securing everything outside, tying down the baskets, covering the drying meat, bringing tools indoors. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up. Loose branches scraped against the cabin, and dust swirled across the clearing. A horse approached at a steady pace. The sound cut through the wind, familiar and grounding. Elias emerged from the trees, rain jacket tied across his saddle, his face set with calm determination. His injured arm remained in the sling, but he looked more steady than earlier in the week. "You shouldn't be out here alone in this weather," he said, pulling the horse to a stop. "Storm's moving and fast. You'll need better shelter than this if it gets worse." Asha understood what he meant. Her cabin, though stronger now, was still a fragile structure. A powerful storm could loosen the boards again or send debris crashing into it. She didn't want to be pushed into danger, not after everything she had fought to rebuild. Elias didn't wait for her to decide. He dismounted slowly, mindful of his shoulder, and stepped closer, but still kept enough distance for her comfort. "My place is safer," he said. "Thicker walls. Reinforced roof. You can stay there until the storm passes." Asha hesitated. Going to his cabin meant stepping into another person's home for the first time since she lost her family. That idea stirred anxiety and uncertainty. But staying here meant risking injury or another loss she couldn't afford. She looked at the sky again, dark clouds churning, thunder rolling louder. She nodded once. Elias offered his hand to help her mount, but she shook her head. She preferred walking beside the horse. He respected that without comment. They traveled the trail in silence, moving quickly as the wind whipped through the trees. By the time they reached his cabin, the first drops of rain had begun to fall. Elias opened the door and stepped aside so she could enter first. The interior was simple but sturdy. Thick logs forming the walls, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with tools and supplies. It felt lived in but orderly, built by someone who valued function and stability. Asha stood near the door, studying the space carefully. Elias didn't crowd her. He removed his hat, shook the rain from it, and set on a hook. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll stay by the fire." She frowned slightly. "I don't need the bed. It's warmer there," he replied simply. "And your shoulder healed faster than mine ever did. You'll sleep better." The comment was practical, not insistent. She stepped toward the bed, but didn't sit yet. She looked around the room again, not searching for danger, but for understanding. Objects on the shelves told pieces of Elias's life. An old pocket knife worn smooth from use, a faded photograph of a boy with light hair, a small wooden carving that looked hand-shaped rather than store-bought. The photograph drew her attention more than anything else. Elias noticed. He didn't hide it or turn it over. "That's my son," he said quietly. He used to sit right there carving things from scrapwood. He'd give them names, even when they barely looked like animals. Asha listened, sensing the steady ache behind his words. He didn't speak of the past often. When he did, it was never with dramatics. Only the plain truth of someone who learned to live with grief rather than bury it. She stepped closer to the fire and warmed her hands. Rain began hammering against the roof, steady and forceful. The storm escalated quickly, shaking the shutters. Elias added wood to the fire and adjusted the iron grate. "You're safe here," he said. "Nothing's getting through these walls." Asha didn't answer immediately. She stood beside him, watching the flames reflect in his eyes. Being inside someone else's home again stirred memories, some painful, some distant. But the warmth of the cabin, the sturdiness of the roof, and the quiet reassurance in Elias's voice steadied her. He pulled a blanket from a chest and handed it to her. Their hands brushed briefly. A small, steady warmth climbed up her arm. Not fear, not discomfort, but something unexpected and grounding. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm raged outside, but the cabin felt calm, the fire casting steady light across the room. Asha studied Elias's profile, strong, worn, steady, and realized that she no longer felt threatened by closeness. She felt safe. She lowered her gaze. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elias looked at her with a soft, controlled expression. "You don't owe me anything. Not for today. Not for anything." His sincerity tightened something in her chest. She had carried her life alone for so long that the idea of someone choosing to stand with her, not out of obligation, but out of care, felt almost unreal. As the storm continued to push against the cabin, Asha sat on the bed with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Elias settled near the fire, his posture relaxed, the flickering light outlining the quiet strength he carried. For the first time since she lost her family, she fell asleep without fear clawing at her thoughts. And for the first time, she allowed someone else's presence to give her peace. The storm lasted through most of the night. Rain hammered against the roof in steady, violent bursts. Wind rattled the shutters, and thunder rolled across the plains with enough force to shake the lantern hook. Yet inside the cabin, the fire held strong, and the thick log walls absorbed the worst of the noise. Asha slept deeper than she expected. When she finally opened her eyes, dawn light pushed weakly through the curtains. The storm had passed, leaving only the soft crackle of dying embers and the faint smell of wet earth drifting through the window seams. Elias was already awake, sitting near the fire with a cup of coffee in his good hand. His injured arm rested in the sling, but he looked more rested than usual. He glanced at her when she shifted on the bed. "Morning," he said. Asha sat up slowly, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. She wasn't used to waking in someone else's home, and the unfamiliar comfort made her cautious for a moment. But the calm atmosphere, the steady fire, and Elias's quiet presence eased her back into herself. "You slept well," he added. She nodded. There was no point pretending otherwise. It was the first peaceful night she'd had in months. Outside, the storm had left its mark: broken branches, scattered debris, deep pools of mud. Elias stepped to the window to check the sky before turning back to her. "Your cabin might have taken some damage," he said. "We should check it before the ground dries too much." Asha stood, folded the blanket, and prepared herself for the possibility of loss. She had rebuilt her home once. The thought of doing it again weighed on her, but she didn't feel the same dread she once did. Elias's presence at her side changed the way she approached uncertainty. They saddled his horse and began the slow walk toward her cabin. The path was slippery, and fallen limbs blocked parts of the trail. Elias guided the horse while Asha cleared branches with her hands, her boots sinking into the mud. When they reached her clearing, she stopped and exhaled with quiet relief. The cabin still stood. The roof remained intact, the reinforced walls held firm, and the damage was minimal: a few shifted boards and scattered debris. Elias surveyed the area with a subtle nod. "Looks like the repairs held." Asha walked around the cabin, checking every wall, every beam, every corner. The structure remained solid, proof of their combined effort. She felt a small swell of pride and gratitude she wasn't sure how to express. As she finished her inspection, footsteps approached from the trail. Asha stiffened immediately. Elias turned toward the sound, his posture shifting into the same protective stance she had seen before. The town judge stepped into the clearing, flanked by two townsmen who watched Asha with suspicion. The judge was an older man with a weathered face and a stern expression. "Morning, Elias," the judge said, then glanced at Asha. "We need to speak with her." Asha narrowed her eyes, unsure what accusation they carried this time. The tension in her chest rose quickly, but she forced herself to hold steady. The judge cleared his throat. "There's been concern about settlement boundaries. Some folks think she's living too close to the town line. This land hasn't been formally cleared for living." Asha felt the familiar frustration rise, another reminder that she was tolerated only to a point. She had chosen this spot because it was isolated, hidden, and far from the paths others traveled. She harmed no one, yet they still found reason to challenge her existence. Elias stepped forward, his tone calm but unwavering. "This land isn't claimed by the town or any ranch. She's within her rights." One of the men scoffed. "Since when does a ranch hand decide that?" Elias didn't react to the insult. "Since the day I started writing these borders. I know every piece of land between here and the ridge. And you know this area isn't assigned to anyone." The judge shifted uncomfortably. Elias's reputation for fairness and steady judgment carried weight in the settlement. He wasn't a man easily dismissed. Asha remained silent, watching the exchange. For months, she had faced hostility alone. Now, someone stood beside her, not speaking for her, but defending her right to exist without being pushed out. The judge exhaled, not wanting to create conflict where there didn't need to be any. "We just needed to check. If she's not interfering with anyone, then we have no further issue." He motioned for the men to follow him back down the trail. Before leaving, he looked at Asha and gave a curt nod. Not friendly, but not hostile. Once they disappeared, Asha released the tension in her breath. Elias stepped beside her, his expression steady. "They won't bother you again," he said. She studied him carefully. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't threatened anyone. He simply stood his ground with calm certainty. Certainty, she had learned to rely on more than she expected. Asha walked to the cabin door and touched the reinforced frame. Everything she had rebuilt remained standing. Everything she feared losing had been protected. Elias watched her with a quiet understanding. "If you want," he said, "I can help you build something stronger here. Something permanent." The offer carried weight, not because of the labor involved, but because of what permanence meant. It wasn't just shelter, it was a life, a choice, a future. Asha looked at him, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "I want that," she said. The words felt natural, steady, like a decision made long before she realized it herself. Elias nodded once, the faintest sign of a smile touching his expression. Together, they began clearing the debris from the storm, their movements unspoken but coordinated. The beginning of something new took shape between them. Not forced, not rushed, but built through every moment of honesty, help, and quiet trust they had shared. The day moved forward with a sense of direction neither of them had felt in years. The morning after the judge's visit carried a different kind of stillness, one shaped not by fear, but by resolution. Asha stepped outside her cabin, taking in the clearing with a steady, grounded breath. The storm had passed, the land was quiet, and for the first time since she arrived here, she felt secure in the place she called home. The threat of being forced out had faded, and Elias's presence beside her had shown the townsfolk she was no longer an isolated, vulnerable outsider. Elias arrived not long after sunrise, carrying a small toolbox in one hand and a rolled canvas in the other. His injured arm was still bound, but he looked determined, calm, and focused. "Ready to start?" he asked. Asha nodded. She didn't need to ask what he meant. Yesterday's promise had not been an empty offer. They were going to build something stronger, something meant to last. He unrolled the canvas on the ground, revealing a set of drawn plans. Nothing elaborate, nothing grand, just practical improvements, a stronger roof beam, a sealed window frame, a raised foundation to keep out the winter rains. Asha crouched beside him, studying the lines. He explained each part with simple clarity, making sure she understood and approved every detail. "You'll decide everything," he said. "It's your home." The statement eased one of the quiet questions she had carried, whether accepting help meant losing control over her life. It didn't. Elias respected her choices, her space, and her independence. They worked through the day together, gathering materials from the forest, stripping bark from sturdy fallen logs, and reinforcing the outer frame. Elias instructed, but never dictated. Asha made decisions with growing confidence, shaping the home she wanted rather than the temporary shelter she had been forced to accept. As they worked, small pieces of their lives filled the space between tasks. Asha asked how long he had been living near the settlement. Elias told her about his early years working cattle drives, his time building fences for ranches, and the quiet years after his son's death, when he drifted from job to job without direction. When he asked about her family, she hesitated only briefly. She spoke of her mother's quiet strength, her father's patience, and the night the raid tore everything apart. She did not describe the violence in detail. She didn't need to. Elias understood the weight in her voice. They didn't offer each other comfort through touching or grand promises. Their connection grew through simple acts, lifting beams together, sharing water, assessing the sunlight angles on the cabin walls. Their trust had formed through practical gestures, and it deepened through the work they did side by side. By late afternoon, the improvements stood solid. The roof line even, the structure balanced, the cabin finally resembling something built with intention rather than desperation. Asha stepped back to look at it, arms crossed, breath steady. She felt an unfamiliar satisfaction rising in her, pride not just in the building, but in the life forming around it. For the first time since losing her family, she didn't feel as though she was merely surviving. She was shaping something new. Elias stood beside her, hands resting lightly on his hips as he surveyed their work. "You did most of this," he said quietly. "So did you." He shook his head slightly. "I held a few boards. You rebuilt your life." The sincerity in his voice settled deep inside her. She met his gaze, and for a moment neither of them looked away. The air between them held a calm understanding, something steady, something chosen. Asha stepped closer, close enough for their shoulders to almost touch. Her voice came out steady. "I want you in this life," she said. "Not because I need protection, because I want you here." Elias didn't move at first. He absorbed her words with the same careful attention he gave everything important. Then he nodded once, slow, certain. "I want to stay," he said. "If you'll have me." There was no hesitation in her answer. "I will." The decision felt natural, grounded, and honest. Not a moment of desperation, not a lack of options, just two people choosing each other after surviving more than either had planned for. They finished the final task before dusk, clearing debris and stacking in used wood. When the sun dropped behind the ridge, Asha lit a small fire in front of the cabin. Elias sat beside her, not too close, not too far, exactly where she had learned to feel at ease. As the fire warmed the evening air, the clearing no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like home. Asha looked at the man beside her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future without fear. One built from quiet trust, shared challenges, and the steady presence of someone who understood her losses without trying to erase them. Elias turned toward her, his expression soft in the firelight. "We'll build more if you want," he said. "A fence, a smoke shed, whatever you need." Asha nodded, her voice warm but firm. "We'll build it together." The night settled around them with gentle calm, the storm long gone, the land peaceful. Nothing felt uncertain anymore. No threats hung over her home. No emptiness pulled at her chest. She had chosen to walk beside him. He had chosen to stay. And their life, finally, was beginning, not surviving, but living,